Hi, this is Joanne Allenbaugh with Pig Health Today, and I'm visiting with Dr. Melissa Hensch, who is the Director of Health and Animal Care at the Maschhoffs, headquartered in Carlyle, Illinois. Melissa, today we're going to be talking about Mycoplasma hyopneumoniae, or MHyo. And can you give us a little bit of background on the virus and what's its present state right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess a little bit of a system perspective is us as a system have eliminated that disease over the last 3 to 5 years. So we operate, by and large, a completely negative herd all the way through our commercial herds today. You're going to find varying degrees of statuses out there today as an industry. Some that would be positive or running positive stable exposure programs, but by and large there's been a very big push to take a lot of herds negative.
How did you accomplish that task? Because a lot of herds are still struggling with that.
It's a very complicated program, that's for sure. We started at the genetics, so the key and beginning is you have to have negative animals coming in. So your genetic supplier, and by and large as an industry, our genetic suppliers are all negative at this point. We eliminated our genetics through a combination of both antibiotics, vaccination, and a herd closure program. So we basically take that and put that into the commercial side as well.
You've done some recent studies. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've learned as we've operated these commercial farms is that we want them negative, but we are vaccinating them. So it's a killed vaccine. That's going to be different from a field virus. Or a field mycoplasma. And so we operate them vaccine positive but negative, and we bring a gilt in. That gilt is still negative to the field strain of mycoplasma, but we want her vaccinated. And so we've been having some issues on testing on some of those off-site GDUs where we're vaccinating gilts, but we want to make sure that we're not bringing in a field strain of mycoplasma to a negative farm. So we've really started to explore what and how those are happening from a false positive standpoint.
So is the gilt-development unit, is that kind of a key to myco elimination?
Absolutely. Again, I mentioned you need to have a negative gilt coming into your herd before you can really think about myco elimination. And then you need to manage going forward after you've eliminated to ensure that you don't bring it back in. So your management of that GDU both throughout the closure as well as once you've eliminated, is very critical.
Let's talk about false positives a little bit and the costs associated with a false positive.
So we would test our GDUs that are off-site for mycoplasma every 28 days to ensure we don't bring something in, and we're doing tracheal bronchial swabs. So there's a lot of labor that goes into that, and if we get a false positive, we have to treat it as real. So anytime we pull a positive on that 28-day test, we say time out, and we execute what's called a health hold, which means we stop moving those animals. We don't want to move those animals into the herd and bring mycoplasma in. So now we've got to go back and prove, is this real, is this not real? And because of how mycoplasma moves, it's a very slow disease. And it doesn't spread rapidly throughout the population, so we also then hold animals for a longer period of time and retest again several weeks later to really build the confidence that we're not going to reintroduce this disease. So it's got some pretty big implications from a cost standpoint and a pig flow standpoint, as well as production in those animals.
So it takes some planning from the standpoint of timing then, of when you're moving animals in and not.
Absolutely. It can really mess up your timing, and I mentioned the cost a little bit, that it's both a people and a labor standpoint. We've got to rearrange everything to go back and retest and make sure we're negative, but the production aspect in those gilts is pretty critical, that you're trying to hit a sweet spot with her relative to her weight and her age and her vaccine status on when you want to breed her. And when you start holding them for 2, 3, 4 weeks, it's not very pretty, and her production is not going to be as good.
So for a producer that's wanting to incorporate an elimination program, what kind of advice would you give to those farms?
If you've already eliminated and you're thinking about testing those GDUs, you really need to think about the implications of a false positive and how much that's going to cost you, and whether you're willing to back that up and do those health holds that I was talking about. As we've tried to understand where those are coming from and what the cause is, we've actually done some studies looking at vaccine. So we are utilizing vaccine in those GDUs. And that vaccine we have actually been able to detect in the environment in and around post-vaccination. So that makes us awfully concerned having that vaccine in that GDU. So if those cost implications are pretty high and we want to make sure that we don't have false positive tests, you might consider moving that vaccine out and putting it into your sow farm and not into your GDU.
So there are some options that producers can use, if they are in that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. The other thing to think about would be if you're going to be implementing a tracheal swab testing to make sure you don't bring mycoplasma back into your herd where you've eliminated it, you got to think about very sterile technique. The snare should be new, should not have been in an environment where vaccine has been used. The coveralls, the gloves, the speculums, everything that you might potentially touch in the environment where vaccine has been used needs to be as sterile as possible, just to really cut down on the likelihood that you could pull a false positive test.
What other take-home advice do you have for producers that are using the same kind of technique that you are, as far as vaccinating gilts in the development unit?
Consider why you are keeping your herd vaccine positive. Do you need to? I would argue that in a commercial herd, absolutely, it's a very cheap insurance policy to do so. But you're not bringing that gilt into a field strain positive farm. She doesn't need to be protected the second she enters that farm, so you don't have to have your vaccine in your GDU setting. If you want to keep a vaccine positive commercial herd but field strain negative, you can vaccinate that gilt post-breed. You can vaccinate her pre-farrow, right, as long as she sees the vaccine at some point. And then you have no chance of finding that vaccine or pulling a false positive at your GDU setting.